because as you do that, you begin to build a library of information in your brain about how to deal with those different kinds of textures. And pretty soon, when you see a photo or you draw from life, you would know what to do because you've already encountered that texture before. I'm actually going to teach you a couple really cool secrets today about how to get the sheen in the hair. So grab your pencils and let's head to my studio. Before we get started on the hair, let me give you a couple of cool tips, inside secrets that I use. I actually carry my art around in these plastic sleeves. You can see that's what the sleeve looks like. And I carry the photo reference in the same sleeve, so that way I don't have to go looking for it every time I want to draw. I always work from photos because I'm the kind of artist who captures memories and moments. And of course somebody can't pose that way for long enough. You can see here I used some tape to kind of crop it so that I could see exactly what I was going to zero in on. I called this one Abba Father Quiets Me because I wanted to show how he gives her rest. I also use really high quality paper, which is really, really important because if you use poor quality paper, you're going to have a problem with it over time. When I was in college, I didn't know better, and so I used this really bad paper, and you can see it yellowed here at the edges because I put tape on it. I didn't know, and then I used a really bad paper, so it also yellowed over time, and the coarse texture is just not the kind that I like because I'm a very detailed artist, and I like my work to look almost photographic. That's especially important when you're drawing hair. So let's go to that right now. When you first get started with drawing hair, I recommend that you copy from the masters because they've learned how to create all those different textures, and as you draw those textures, you start to build a library of information in your own brain about how to deal with that texture when you see it in a photo or when you're drawing from real life. So always copy the masters first. For complicated hair, you need to use a very elaborate contour line drawing because that will give you a map of where to place every single little shape that you see on that particular head. This is a map drawing for the hair that you see when you look at Rachel's bun. You can see that's a fairly complicated drawing, so I needed a very elaborate map. So I knew exactly where to place everything, and I make sure that my map is so exact that when I'm shading, I don't even have to think about the placement. When I'm doing a less complicated drawing like the one that I'm going to demonstrate today, I would use a much simpler map like the one that you see right here. This is the hair that I'm actually going to demonstrate for you today, and I'm going to show you how to create that sheen. That was the map that I would use for this hair. Notice also that I don't bother with the features when I'm practicing hair. If you do that, you'll tend to focus on the likeness and not really learn how to do the hair. Now let's go ahead and get started with this hair so I can show you the trick that I use to get that beautiful sheen. When I did this contour line drawing, I did it really dark just so that it would show up really well on camera, but you certainly don't want to do that when you're drawing at home. So to get rid of a dark line drawing, if you happen to make it too dark, you can just take your kneaded eraser and lift those values. This is what a kneaded eraser looks like. You just pull it like this in order to clean it, and then it's as they say, you just knead it. And then you take it and you go over the entire drawing to lift the lines up so that these lines won't be dark. You don't want your lines to show. Basically, when you're shading, you want the lines to be swallowed by the shading so that they completely disappear, because if the lines show, it's going to look like you just did a drawing in a coloring book. You always want to take your goat hair brush and keep the crumbs off of the paper. It's really important because if you get a crumb under the paper, it can create a little bump in your drawing. This is a goat brush, as you can see. It gets a little bit of graphite on there, but the graphite doesn't come off on the paper, and so that's why I like it. It fits nicely in my case too. Okay, now I'm going to begin with a 2B pencil because I want to put dark at the roots. Even if you paid a lot of money to get rid of the dark at your roots, you want to be sure to put dark at the roots because it anchors the hair to the head. Now I'm going to need to turn this drawing just a little bit so that it's a little more convenient for my hand. I don't have to go into contortions when I'm drawing. So I'm going to start with my 2B, place the dark at the roots, and I'm going to lift up on my pencil as I shade. I'm not going to have even pressure, otherwise that would make my strands look like they're
sure you keep the crumbs off the paper, so brush constantly. And we're going to be putting darks at both edges and then light in the middle. So I'm going to go over here and put a dark at this edge. I'm going to switch my paper just a little bit again. Put a dark at this edge, and then I'm having my thin stroke go towards the middle. That's the stroke that I want to be nice and crisp so that I get that sheen. Now I also want my strokes to be crisp going this direction, because if you end all of your strokes at exactly the same place, you'll end up with what we call banding. I'll show you in a minute what I mean by that when I talk about the mistakes that beginners make when they first learn to draw hair. So I'm putting darks at both edges and light in the middle, and when I put that nice crisp stroke in the center, I'm going to start to get a sheen in the hair. If I need to get a little bit darker, then I switch to a different pencil. Think of your pencils as if they were different colors. I'm switching now to my F. It's a little darker than the 2H, and I'm putting those values right on top of the ones that I just did, always overlapping the strokes so they blend together. A lot of times beginners don't blend their strokes, and then they look more like noodles than like a hair stroke. I want to show you another really cool trick that helps your hair look like it has some depth to it. This is her bangs, and they're fairly light, so they're going to come forward, but I want to place a fairly strong dark behind them because then that will help them to come forward. Hair only looks light when it has dark behind it. So I'm going to place a dark value behind the light hair, and that will help this hair that's in front to look a little bit lighter. Notice that I've got to brush more when I use a softer pencil. Soft pencils are dark and hard pencils are light. So when I use the darker pencil, I've got to brush a little bit more, and I put my strokes going in the same, lifting up at the end, going this way, and lifting up at the end, going this way. So I get that really crisp stroke that makes it look like hair. Now I'm going to show you a couple of the common mistakes that beginners make. A mistake that a lot of beginners make is they will use a dull pencil and they'll press with a solid line instead of lifting up at the end. You can see that looks more like worms than it does like hair. Instead, you want to take a really sharp pencil and you want to lift up at the end so that there's a crisp stroke at the end instead of a very blunt stroke. Also, beginners will often use the wrong pencil. They'll try to get a light value with a dark pencil, and you can see when you try to lighten up with that dark pencil, you just can't get a really crisp line. So you want to always switch to the pencil that's appropriate. Think of these as different colors. Think of your H as a completely different color than your B lead and so forth, and use the appropriate pencil for the color that you're trying to achieve. So you would, with a light color, like this one is actually a 2H, I can get a much crisper stroke. Notice too that I press harder at the beginning and thinner at the end so that when I'm lifting up I get that nice crisp line. Now I'm going to show you another mistake that beginners often make. A lot of times they'll end all their strokes in exactly the same place every time. So then they get what we call banding. In other words, right here in the middle where these strokes don't overlap, you get sort of a banding, or like raccoon fur. You don't want to do that. Instead, here's what you do. You lift your stroke and you go both directions so that you're overlapping the stroke that you just did. So not all those fat strokes clump in the same place. This way you're going to get really crisp lines and you're going to make your hair have a nice sheen to it instead of looking like somebody dumped a bowl of spaghetti on your head. I've been drawing for a while, and now I'd like to put in some of the white highlights. Sometimes it's really hard to leave an area white. So what I do is I use my magic battery operated eraser. I grab a brand new eraser from my box because I want a really sharp edge. I pull this out and stick the brand new eraser inside that case, shove it into my eraser, and then I go ahead and I draw the line, the white line, with my battery eraser. So I'm going to show you how I would do that. I'm just going to draw this line right here, hold it really steady, and then I run it off in between because I know I'm going to get some black on the end of my run it like this. Sometimes it takes a little practice before you can do this, but that makes a really nice white crisp line. If I want to put some highlights up here as well, which she has some highlights in the hair. In fact, she's got a few strands that are sort of out of place and they just go like that. So I just put them in like this. And then I can take my pencil, get off the eraser crumbs, I can take my sharp pencil and I can kind of crisp up that edge so it's a little bit thinner at the beginning and a little bit crisper right at the end of that light stroke as well. I'm going to show you some other examples of where I use the battery eraser and why the tool is so handy. Here's some examples of drawings where I use the battery operated eraser. You can see that right here it would have been very difficult to leave this area white. So instead I just shaded it all in and then I came back with the battery operated eraser and took the white out. I also did that when I was drawing this right here because I had to do these strands and then I just took the white eraser and went over those other strands so that you could see the hair was kind of escaping and, you know, being wayward like hair is. Then I also used the battery operated eraser when I did this drawing of Becky with her hat on. You can see right here I needed to shade all that area and it would have been so hard to leave that section white. So I just created it all gray, took my battery operated eraser and just erased out all the sections that I needed. I did that too. I shaded in her neck and then took the battery eraser and put that in. Then I also did that right here where I wanted to create the fur that's overlapping her jacket as well. So you can see that tool comes in really handy. I just can't even imagine life without it. This also is another example. I used it here for the bubble that she was blowing. So I just shaded the whole thing in and then I took out the areas that I needed white with my battery eraser. And I put a battery eraser on the end of this little wand that she was using to blow the bubbles. You want to be sure that you get a really high quality eraser though. The one we have in our Indulge Me kit is really high quality because the others will not have the torque and you can't get these exact